The conference room was silent, except for the shuffle of papers and the measured voice of the estate attorney. Dozens of Sterling relatives sat in leather chairs, their designer suits glinting under the light. At the end of the table, Victoria Sterling sat with her 6-year-old twins pressed tightly to her sides. When the attorney cleared his throat and read her share of the inheritance, Victoria's world cracked open. $5. A ripple of cruel laughter spread through the room. Richard's family, the wealthy, powerful Sterlings, smirked and whispered, their voices dripping with contempt. To them, she was nothing more than the waitress who had married their golden boy. To them, she was an outsider who didn't belong. Her daughter Emma's tiny hand gripped tighter, nails digging into Victoria's palm. Lucas's face crumpled in confusion. They didn't understand the legal jargon, but they could feel the sting of the mockery. Harrison Sterling, Richard's younger brother, leaned forward with satisfaction. Looks like dear Richard finally came to his senses about his little gold digger. Victoria's chest tightened. It had been 3 months since her husband's sudden death, and this was how his family chose to honor his memory, with humiliation. Then came the matriarch, Eleanor Sterling, her voice like a knife. Perhaps this will teach you, my dear. Breeding with the help doesn't guarantee a payday. The twins flinched. Emma's eyes filled with tears, while Lucas stared at the marble floor, his young mind struggling to process the cruelty. Victoria forced herself to stand tall, though her knees threatened to give way. Around her, the family congratulated themselves as they claimed mansions, businesses, and fortunes, while she was dismissed with a single crumpled bill. Her fingers tightened around the note, the cheap paper burning against her skin. Such a small thing. Such a deliberate insult. But Richard Sterling had been a calculating man, one who planned his moves like a chess master. And deep down, Victoria knew, this $5 bill wasn't an insult. It was a key. The laughter in the conference room faded into an uneasy silence when the estate attorney shifted in his chair. His hands trembled slightly as he reached into his briefcase and produced a sealed envelope. "Mrs. Sterling," he said, his voice lower now, almost hesitant, "your late husband left specific instructions. This is to be given to you privately, outside of this gathering." The words struck like thunder. The family's smirks faltered. Harrison's smile vanished, replaced by sharp suspicion. "Privately," he snapped. "Everything concerning Richard belongs in this room." The attorney straightened, surprising even himself with the steel in his tone. "No. These instructions were explicit. This is separate from the will entirely. Only Mrs. Sterling may see it." Eleanor Sterling's cane struck the floor in agitation, her glare sweeping across the table. "Nonsense. If it involves the family estate, it belongs to the family." But Victoria could see the flicker of something else in the lawyer's expression. Anticipation, maybe even vindication. For once, someone wasn't under the family's thumb. As she gathered her children and rose to follow him out, Harrison's voice sliced through the tension. "You won't get away with this, Victoria. Whatever Richard thought he was protecting you from, you'll learn soon enough. The Sterling family does not forget." His words dripped with menace, but Victoria didn't falter. For the first time in months, her grief-hollowed eyes sparked with something new. She met his gaze. "I'm counting on it." The door to the attorney's private office shut softly behind them, sealing her away from the Sterling family's watchful eyes. She could still hear the echo of their laughter, the contempt in their voices, but the envelope in the lawyer's hand promised something different. Her children curled up in leather chairs, exhaustion tugging at their small frames. Victoria's own hands shook as she broke the seal. The paper inside felt heavier than it should have, weighted with secrets. In Richard's familiar handwriting, one line stood out like fire across the page. "The $5 isn't random. Check the serial number." Victoria stared at the note, her pulse quickening. Richard hadn't abandoned her. He hadn't left her humiliated without reason. This was a message. A clue. The $5 bill in her trembling hand was not an insult. It was a code, one that would lead her to the truth. The attorney's office was quiet, the heavy curtains drawn against the outside world. For the first time that day, Victoria felt the weight of the family's eyes lift from her shoulders. Marcus Webb, the estate lawyer, slid the $5 bill across the desk. His voice was steady, but his eyes betrayed urgency. Check the serial number, Mrs. Sterling. That was Richard's last request. Victoria held the crumpled note up to the light. The numbers stared back at her. B472918556C. At first, they meant nothing. But when Webb unlocked a hidden drawer and produced a small key, the pieces began to align. That number, he explained, is the combination for a safety deposit box at First National Bank. Box number 2847. Richard told me you'd understand once you saw what was inside. Her throat tightened. 4 months, she had been drowning in grief, in humiliation, in the suffocating presence of Richard's family. And yet, here was proof that her husband had been thinking ahead, planning beyond his own death. Why would he leave this for me? She whispered. Webb leaned closer, his voice dropping. Because he knew the danger you and the children would be in after he was gone. Richard discovered things about his family, things they would kill to keep buried. He spent his final year preparing a shield for you, and this is the first step. Victoria's fingers trembled as she clutched the bill, realization dawning. The cruelty of the will reading had not been her husband's betrayal. It had been his test, a way to draw out the family's true nature, to expose them for what they were. Her children shifted in their chairs, their small faces pale with fatigue. Emma whispered, "Mommy, can we go home now?" Victoria forced a smile, brushing a strand of hair from her daughter's face. "Soon, sweetheart. Very soon." But inside, her resolve hardened. She was no longer a widow left with scraps. She was holding the key to something greater, Richard's final game, and the truth that could destroy the Sterlings once and for all. The next morning, with Webb at her side, Victoria walked into First National Bank. The air inside was cool and sterile, the marble floors gleaming. The manager greeted Webb with visible unease, recognizing the Sterling name but deferring when he presented federal credentials. 2 keys, one from the bank and one from Webb, unlocked the metal door. Together they pulled open the drawer. Inside sat a thick manila folder, a set of legal documents, and a single letter marked in Richard's hand. For Victoria. Her pulse raced as she unfolded the pages. The words blurred through tears. "If you're reading this, then my family has shown you their true nature. The $5 was no insult. It was the code to the world I've built to protect you. Inside this box is the evidence you'll need to keep our children safe. Trust no one from my bloodline. Trust Webb completely. And know that every move I've made has been to protect you and the twins. I loved you enough to spend my last year building walls they cannot tear down." The folder beneath the letter was filled with horrors, recordings of whispered conspiracies, financial fraud, even proof that Richard had been poisoned slowly under the guise of treatment. Victoria's world tilted. The grief, the guilt, the shame, all of it twisted into something new. Fury. The drive out of the city felt unreal. Victoria sat in silence, the $5 bill folded carefully in her palm, while Marcus Webb guided the car through winding mountain roads. Her twins had fallen asleep in the back seat, their small faces softened by dreams, unaware of the storm brewing around them. When the vehicle turned onto a gravel road marked only with a faded private property, no trespassing sign, Victoria frowned. "Where are we going?" she asked, her voice tight. Webb's answer was calm but loaded with meaning. To your real inheritance." The trees parted, and the sight that greeted her stole the breath from her lungs. Nestled into the mountainside was a contemporary estate unlike anything she'd ever seen. Stone walls rose in harmony with the land, vast glass panels reflected the sky, and landscaped gardens burst with color. A stream wound through the property, feeding into a small waterfall that sparkled in the late afternoon sun. It was not a mansion built to intimidate. It was a home built to protect. Two figures emerged from the front steps as they pulled up, a man and a woman, both in their 40s. Their movements were fluid, purposeful. The man carried a tray of still-warm cookies, smiling warmly at the twins as they stirred awake. The woman's eyes, though kind, scanned the tree lane with the precision of someone who had seen combat. "Sarah and Michael Chen," Webb introduced. "Former FBI. Your husband hired them 2 years ago." Victoria's mouth went dry. "FBI? Not anymore," Michael said with a gentle smile. "Now we work for you. Richard wanted to make sure you'd never be alone." The children, oblivious to the tension, ran to explore the garden. Emma squealed at the sight of a treehouse built into an oak, while Lucas crouched by the stream, fascinated by the tiny fish darting through the water. Victoria stood frozen. Just yesterday, she had been mocked in a sterile conference room, left with nothing but a single bill. And now she was standing in the middle of a fortress designed by her husband, staffed with professionals ready to defend her life. Webb placed a hand on her shoulder. "Richard thought of everything. The estate isn't just a home, it's a sanctuary. Reinforced walls, escape tunnels, a surveillance grid that covers every inch of this property. He wanted you and the children safe, no matter what." Victoria swallowed hard, her eyes stinging. For months she had believed she was abandoned, cast aside by her husband's death. But here was proof. Richard had spent every moment of his last year preparing for this exact day. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the house in golden light, Victoria felt something stir inside her. For the first time since Richard's death, she wasn't just surviving. She was standing on ground built to keep her safe. And if the Sterling family thought she would be an easy target, they were about to learn just how wrong they were. For one brief evening, the estate felt like a sanctuary. Victoria tucked her twins into soft beds, kissed their foreheads, and lingered to watch them breathe peacefully. The house hummed quietly around her, its systems alive with hidden protections. But safety never lasts when predators are circling. The first sign came just before dawn. Sarah, the bodyguard with watchful eyes, burst into Victoria's room, her voice clipped. Thermal scans picked up movement in the tree lane. Multiple heat signatures. Armed. Victoria's stomach dropped. Already. Michael appeared in the doorway, rifle slung over his shoulder. His calm tone couldn't hide the urgency. "They found us. And they didn't come to talk." On the surveillance monitors, shadows flickered through the forest. Mercenaries, trained and coordinated. The Sterling family hadn't wasted time. Less than 24 hours after the will reading, they had mobilized soldiers to erase Victoria and her children. Downstairs, Marcus Webb studied the feeds with narrowed eyes. Professional setup. "They're not here to scare you, Mrs. Sterling. They're here to finish what they started with Richard." Victoria's hand shook, but not with fear, with fury. She remembered Eleanor's cold eyes at the will reading. Harrison's cruel smile. Their threats weren't idle. They were ready to bury her children to keep their empire intact. The house sealed itself into lockdown mode, shutters sliding over the glass panels, alarms humming low. Still, the unease in Victoria's chest grew. And then the true blow came. Static crackled through the radio system. A familiar voice, calm and steady, spoke over the line. "Victoria, this is Sarah. We need to talk." Victoria froze. Sarah was supposed to be inside. She had been with them only minutes earlier. Michael's face paled as he scanned the monitors. There she was, moving confidently through a hidden corridor, carrying equipment, leading Sterling men straight to the estate. Webb cursed under his breath. She's been feeding them information the whole time. The betrayal hit like ice water. The woman who had handed cookies to her twins, who had promised to protect them, was a traitor. The monitors flared red. 7 mercenaries closed in on the outer perimeter. On another feed, Sarah whispered directions, pointing to weak points in the defense grid Richard had built. Victoria's hands clenched into fists. She had expected cruelty from the Sterlings, but this violation of trust cut deeper than anything else. Michael's jaw tightened. We'll hold them off as long as we can, but with Sarah's intel, they'll find the cracks. It's only a matter of time. Victoria glanced at her children on the upstairs feed, still asleep, oblivious to the war gathering around them. Her heart thundered, but her voice was steady. Then we give them a fight they'll never forget. The estate groaned under pressure. Lights flickered as the intruders tested the outer defenses. Distant gunfire cracked through the forest, the sound bouncing against the mountain walls. Victoria stood at the control hub, a sleek room Richard had designed like the bridge of a ship. Screens mapped the property, red dots marking every enemy soldier inching closer. Her reflection in the glass was pale, frightened. And then it wasn't. Something hardened in her eyes. She touched the edge of Richard's final letter, the words echoing in her mind. I built this for you. Trust yourself. For weeks she had let grief chain her, let humiliation weigh her down. But now, standing in the fortress her husband designed, watching mercenaries march toward her children, she felt something unfamiliar rising. Anger sharpened into resolve. Michael, she said, her voice steady, show me how to use the defense grid. The former agent hesitated, surprised by her tone. Then he nodded and guided her hands over the console. Within minutes, she was scanning heat signatures, activating countermeasures, and rerouting power to reinforce weak points Sarah had exposed. When another mercenary squad tried breaching the south wall, Victoria didn't flinch. She triggered the hydraulic barriers Richard had installed. Steel shutters that slammed down with the force of thunder, trapping 3 men between layers of reinforced concrete. Status? She asked calmly, like a commander. Michael gave a thin smile. Holding. For now. But her fight wasn't just tactical. She went upstairs where Emma and Lucas huddled on the bed, wide-eyed after hearing the first echoes of combat. Kneeling, she held their small hands, looking into their frightened faces. Listen to me, she whispered. You're safe. Daddy built this house to keep us safe. And Mommy is going to protect you, no matter what. Do you believe me? Lucas's lower lip trembled. But they're outside. Yes, she said, pulling him close. They're outside. And outside is where they'll stay. Something in her conviction settled the twins. They clung to her not with fear now, but with trust. And that trust fueled her fire. Back in the control hub, Victoria replayed the intercepted audio feed, Sarah's voice betraying them, guiding the enemy. She studied every word, every hesitation, until she saw an opening. Patch me into their channel, she ordered. Webb blinked. What are you planning? Richard always said the Sterling's greatest weapon was fear. Let's see how they like it turned against them. When her voice crackled through the mercenaries' earpieces, icy calm, it froze them in their tracks. You think you've cornered me, Victoria said. But you've stepped into my husband's house. And here I write the rules. Every path you take, every door you breach, I'll be waiting. One by one you'll fall. Silence followed. Then, a nervous curse from one of the intruders. Another barked an order, but their tone wavered. Michael glanced at her, astonished. You just turned the hunter into the hunted. Victoria's lips curved into a grim smile. No. I just reminded them. They underestimated the wrong woman. The night air outside the fortress was thick with smoke and gunpowder. The Sterling mercenaries had surrounded the estate, their floodlights cutting through the trees, casting jagged shadows across the mountain walls. Inside, Victoria stood tall in the control hub, her face illuminated by the glow of the monitors. Richard's world, his last gift, pulsed around her like a living shield. The enemy had numbers, but she had Richard's foresight and her own resolve. Through the intercepted channel, she heard Harrison Sterling's voice, sharp with impatience. Finish it. End this tonight. That woman and her brats won't see another sunrise. The words burned through her chest. Her children's lives were not bargaining chips. They were her purpose. Victoria's fingers flew across the console. Michael, lock down east and south wings. Force them toward the west pass. He nodded, sealing the estate's corridors with reinforced barriers. The intruders were funneled into narrow choke points, just as Richard had designed. The first breach came with a thunderous blast. The west gate shuddered under explosives. 7 armed men stormed through, their boots pounding against stone. Victoria was ready. She activated the suppression grid. Hidden vents hissed, flooding the corridor with tear gas. Coughs and shouts erupted as the mercenaries clawed at their masks, blinded and stumbling. From the upper level, Michael's rifle cracked once, twice, 3 times. 3 red dots blinked out on the screen. But they kept coming. Sarah's voice cut through the chaos, steady and cold. Don't stop. I'll guide you through the blind spots. She doesn't know every weakness. Victoria's jaw tightened. Sarah, the woman who had handed cookies to her children, was somewhere in the dark, leading the killers closer. Then, another voice came on the feed. Dr. Morrison, the family's trusted ally. His tone was mocking, venomous. You've done well, Mrs. Sterling. But you can't fight us forever. The Sterling name has crushed better opponents than you. Victoria exhaled slowly, her fingers hovering over a hidden command Richard had labeled simply. N.O. The nuclear option. She had studied it for hours in Richard's notes. A last resort. A self-destruct that would collapse the mountain's hidden tunnels, sealing off every approach, cutting off the estate from the outside world, burying anyone caught in its path. It wasn't just a defense. It was a death sentence for those who dared to breach the fortress. Her heart thundered. She thought of her children upstairs, their small chests rising and falling in sleep. She thought of Richard, poisoned by the very family that now hunted her. And she pressed the command. The ground trembled. Deep within the mountain, charges detonated one by one, like the beat of a war drum. The monitors lit up in bursts of red as tunnels collapsed, escape routes vanished, and enemy signals blinked out of existence. Panic spread over the mercenaries' channel. Shouts, curses, the crackle of fear. Sarah's voice broke through, high-pitched now, no longer calm. She's sealing us in. Pull back. Pull. The transmission cut to static. Victoria stood in silence, the vibrations shaking dust from the ceiling, until the final boom faded into the night. On the screen, only a handful of red dots remained. Mercenaries scattered, leaderless, trapped in their own fear. For the first time since Richard's death, Victoria felt the weight on her chest lift. She hadn't just survived. She had won. Michael turned to her, eyes wide with awe. You just buried the Sterling Empire's army. Victoria's voice was calm, almost cold. No. I buried their arrogance. The mountain was quiet. The echoes of detonations had faded, leaving only the low hum of the estate's generators. Smoke curled from the collapsed tunnels, rising into the night sky like the last breath of a dying beast. Victoria stood at the main balcony, her children wrapped in blankets beside her. Emma leaned against her shoulder. Lucas clutched a stuffed toy. Their small bodies trembled, but their eyes never left their mother's face. They didn't see fear there anymore. They saw strength. Behind her, Michael and Webb worked quickly, transmitting Richard's files to federal agents. Recordings, financial ledgers, confessions. Evidence Richard had gathered for months. Everything the Sterling family had done, every crime they had buried, now sat in the hands of the FBI. By dawn, the estate's secure line rang with confirmation. "Mrs. Sterling," an agent's voice said, crisp and certain, "we've begun moving on the Sterlings. Arrests are already underway." Victoria closed her eyes, relief washing over her. At last, Richard's sacrifice meant something. His death would not be a forgotten tragedy. It was the spark that ignited the downfall of a dynasty. News spread quickly. By evening, headlines blared. "Sterling Empire crumbles under federal investigation." Eleanor's empire of intimidation cracked. Harrison's smug arrogance shattered under the weight of indictments. Those who had mocked Victoria at the will reading were now paraded before cameras in handcuffs. Yet there was no satisfaction in their ruin. Only justice. On the balcony, as the sun painted the mountains gold, Victoria whispered to her children, "Your father built this for us. He gave everything to keep us safe. And now, it's our turn to live." Emma's small voice asked, "Are we safe now, Mommy?" Victoria kissed her forehead. "Yes, sweetheart. We're safe. And we're free." For the first time since Richard's passing, Victoria allowed herself to breathe deeply. Not as a widow clinging to scraps, not as a mother cornered by predators, but as a survivor, a fighter, a woman who had stared into the face of power and refused to bow. The Sterlings had left her with $5, but Richard had left her with something far greater, a future her children could stand proudly in. As the twins drifted to sleep in her arms, Victoria looked out across the land Richard had chosen. The fortress stood tall, unbroken, a testament to love, sacrifice, and foresight. Her voice was steady, almost a vow. "They'll never underestimate us again." And with that, the Sterling dynasty was no more.